Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We still see that more people are joining, so we will give it a few more minutes and then we can start. All right, thank you everyone for joining us today. I would like to invite my colleagues and friends to join as well on the camera. My name is Martin Zuzek. I'm going to be your host today. We will be talking about predictions 2026. Before we start, a couple of housekeeping rules. So the questions that we get every single time, yes, we are recording this. And yes, we will send you email later where you can watch the recording. So you don't need to ask us. That's the question that we get every single time. I would also like to say that please ask us the questions in the Q&A. We have really interesting experts with opinions today. And we are definitely going to follow up on all the questions, whether it's online or offline, doesn't matter, but we will get back to you. So talking about the guests today, I have two special people joining me. I have Dragos Gavrilut and I have Sean Nicol. We have two perspectives. We have one practitioner from our Bitdefender MDR team, and we have one expert on detections, the logic, and more from the academia world, Dragos. So guys, why don't you introduce who you are, what do you do for a living, what is your day like for like a 1 minute each. Dragos, let's start with you.
Okay. So hello everyone, and Martin, thank you for inviting me here. So my name is Dragos. I'm the Vice President of Threat Research here in Bitdefender. I handle most of the detection technologies that implies detection and response part. So everything related to EDR, XDR, network attack defense, a lot of AI that can be embedded with this. And I'm also, as Martin says, involved in a lot of academic work related to research, especially in the cybersecurity area. Happy to be here, and stay tuned because there is going to be a lot of interesting prediction and discussion on this webinar.
Sean, over to you.
All right. I'm Sean Nicol. I'm excited to be here this morning. I'm the team lead for the Cyber Intelligence Fusion Cell. That's a part of the Bitdefender MDR service. Been working in the MDR space for the better part of a decade now, and have seen a lot of interesting attacks and been able to do some interesting intelligence work. So a lot of this stuff is near and dear to me, and I know in the past, Martin's been pretty dead on with some of these predictions. So I'm curious to see if his near perfect record is going to continue.
Okay, then let me close with myself. I'm Martin Zuzek. I work with both of these amazing people, and my job can be described as a lot of like public education or industry education about cybersecurity. So I'm trying to make it more accessible to public. Now, today, couple of kind of notes also for the guests about what we are going to do. We are going to talk about predictions for 2026 about cybersecurity. Now, I want to start by saying we want to keep the scope limited to the next 12 months, because in my experience, it's very easy to make predictions about like what is potential in the 10 years of some technology. It is actually much harder to make realistic predictions for what you are going to see in the next 12 months. So instead of talking about like all the potential futuristic stuff, I really want to keep it this pragmatic and focused on time period. The second note is that our opinions today are not going to represent the view of Bitdefender. It is purely because I want to, we can have some controversial discussions, that's perfectly fine, but I want to see opinions. So that means I want to see what Dragos and Sean thinks about certain topics. That doesn't necessarily represent Bitdefender in any way. So we will be sharing with you today our opinions, and it's important to make that distinction here. So Predictions are hard, especially about the future, but as Sean was saying, we are really trying to make our predictions more rooted in reality. But this year, we will address in this conversation we are going to have, we are actually going to address two different things. The first one is more about what everyone is talking about, AI and agentic AI and so on. We have to address it because again, like it's part of the conversation, but we also want to figure out like what is the probable reality that we are going to see. And then the second part of conversation is going to be what is happening with the mostly financially motivated cyber criminals, because when we are doing like a threat modeling, that is something that we would probably suggest you really pay a lot of attention next year, or every year for the last couple of years, I would say. Let's start with the first topic of the day. And that is going to be the AI-generated malware. And I have a lot of my own opinions about this topic. In short, I would summarize it that LLMs are raising the quality floor for malware, but they remain derivative. They are not really innovative. So Dragos will actually start talking with you about this because again, like you know a lot of how detections in endpoint security products, for example, are designed, generally speaking, like the theory behind all these defensive technologies. So I know that in our telemetry, we see something over 1,000 new malware variants per minute, roughly 1.5 million new variants every single day. Huge volume, but this is not anything new. So since LLMs are excellent at repackaging code across languages, so it makes it easy for the threat actors to move from whatever is the language they know to Rust or Golang. Is this high volume of malware actually making detection logic more challenging? Does it change anything for you, the job, how you approach detections? Or is it mostly the same as normal malware?
Okay, so before I'm going to answer this, let's explain a little bit, a couple of things related to how a detection is being added. And this is more like a generic approach for any kind of detection. So first of all, having a lot of samples, like a large amount of sample, could also be something good. I know it seems interesting saying something like this, but let's follow the next logic. So whenever you get, let's say, an attack, a threat that you need to detect, if it's one scenario, one case that you have there, you can try to create a more generic detection. But trying to create a more generic detection, having one or two samples, will most likely fail because you're going to do something that is considered to be generic based on those two samples. Now, if you have more samples, then it's going to be, let's say, a little bit easier for you to create a more generic detection. On the other hand, having more samples is going to be a little bit slower for you to actually create a proper detection. You're not going to be as fast as you can, at least from a, let's say, human perspective. Now, obviously, there are a lot of automated systems that will try to augment the data. So try to look at the data, try to augment the data. So from that perspective, things are going to be the same. Now, that's one perspective. The other one is that most of the systems or the analysts that you have that work for adding a detection are accustomed with certain type of tools that are, let's say, usually used by an attacker. Like there are some forms of obfuscator. Obviously, they do have some variation, but you're, let's say, a little bit accustomed to them. There are certain type of languages that an attacker is using that you're also accustomed to them. Now, being accustomed with to a language or to some tools implies that you're, let's say, faster in terms of quickly looking to the code and say, yeah, this is malicious. It looks like that sample. On the other hand, moving towards a completely different language could actually be more complex. You need to understand how that language compiles the code. If it's an interpreted language, you need to understand how the interpreter works. If you can extract the original code, if you can decompile it, what kind of tools you need to decompile it. If you decompile it, you need to actually understand that new language and so on. So yeah, variety changes a lot of things. Now, strictly from this perspective, it's going to be harder to add a detection faster. Not complicated in terms of adding a more generic detection, but harder in terms of adding something faster. From a different perspective, this is purely the things that are going to happen if you're just using, the same analyst doing only this. But if you're also using AI to target this, to help you better understand some things, you can actually reduce this gap. So, instead of, having the same person that is looking only on the same set of malware every time, you're helping that person by using an AI to augment some of the information that you can extract there. Then it's going to be, you can actually reduce the gap, the gap related to how fast you can actually add the detection. So that's one perspective. The other one is that you might go dynamic. Now, everything I said up to this point means you're looking to things statically. Now, if you try to go dynamic, pretty much this means you take the attack, you try to replicate it, simulate it into a virtual environment, and see exactly what happens. Now, one advantage here is that if you're actually doing this, then, pretty much the changing from one language to another doesn't mean you're necessarily changing the behavior. It just means that I'm going to do the same thing in a different way, but the same thing, which actually translates that in a virtual environment, I'm going to see the same, basic actions, processes that are being created, files that are being written, and so on. This means that being capable of identifying the malicious content is theoretically just as good, or in terms of the quality just as good, but having a larger amount of files implies that you need to scale up your, let's say, sandbox infrastructure that you're using to analyze more samples that you have. So again, from this perspective, there are going to be some challenges. I would, however, highlight one, let's say, one more thing that is going to be important here. Even if from a detection perspective, you might be, let's say, capable of identifying that something is malicious or not, with some adjustment in, basically the same amount of time, attribution is going to be so much harder. Attribution usually rely on similarity, on code, on using some form of, let's say, basic blocks that are going to be similar. This is going to be extremely changed because, if in the past, let's say, I have written, let's say, a ransomware, and then I need to write another ransomware, and most likely I will use some pieces of code from the old ransomware, and those pieces of code that I would have used from the older ransomware to the new ransomware would be like a signature to match me. This is not going to happen anymore. You can just ask the AI to rebuild your entire code from zero, write it in a different way. So most likely some of the attribution technologies will be required to change.
I will have a follow-up question about attribution, but Dragos, I do have one thing specifically that I wanted to ask you now. So a lot of discussions I'm seeing on professional social networks, LinkedIn, less on Reddit, that is different one, is, for example, calling for how defenders need to develop new technologies. I see a lot of reintroduction of the concept. So I see a lot of people talking about polymorphism, the ability of malware to change the signature of the file as something completely new, while in reality that has been like a reality for a very long time. So from this perspective, do you see any changes that you need to take today, or is it more it's an old problem, old technology, we just talk about it because it's new and hot at this moment?
So polymorphism has been there for, I don't know, 30, 40 years now. So it's not under no circumstances something new. If you have a full security solution that has static detections, that have dynamic detections, that has a sandbox, and that can actually combine the information for all of them, most likely you will find it easier to use some information from one technology with some information from another technology with some information from other technology and combine them together. It will be much easier than necessarily go and just rely on a single technology. So the solution from my perspective is use a layered detection technology rather than rely on only one technology where you should improve over and over again. In particular, if people are saying, yeah, new malware rely on polymorphism, it's correct. But if your entire, let's say, security approach implies that you're only going to scan the threat with a static scanner like an anti-malware engine and you're just improving there, then this is not a good approach, because at some point something will escape. So having other layers that will be able to detect from a different perspective and combining all of the information together is a more correct approach in this sense.
So let me ask you again, just to like put things into perspective. When have, for example, we, with like the gravity zone as an example, implemented this multi-layered approach that is needed? Because again, there is a lot of the conversations I'm seeing is more like calling as if it's something that we need to do as soon as possible. And where's the reality? Like, when did we start doing
the reality is a little bit different. So the last piece of this technology, the one that actually correlates all of the information from the other layers together, which is pretty much our EDR, has been around for 7-8 years. So all of the other technologies were, developed up to that point. So again, as I said, it's not something new. It's older technologies that need to be tweaked or combined together in a different way. But assuming you already have a layer that can combine all of this together, then you should be fine.
Okay. Now let me get back a little bit. You touched one interesting point about the attribution, because again, like I see a lot of conversations about AI generated malware is actually talking like it's like a time machine talking about problems that we've seen and we solved like decades ago in some cases. But there are some real challenges with AI generated malware. And I would say attribution, like a death of attribution, slow death of attribution, is potentially one of those. So let's switch to Sean. Question for you. So if we have, let's say, a Russian state actor and a teenager somewhere in a basement, and they produced identical code using the same LLM prompt. So for example, they do the LSASS dump or something similar. It looks the same. So is the industry's obsession with attribution, being able to say who has done it instead of just knowing like what has been done, is it becoming a distraction? Like from your perspective of like seeing all the global trends, industry trends, does it still actually matter who is it that have done the attack? Like what are your thoughts on this?
That's an interesting question. I think that's something we'll probably have to talk about in the survey we'll do later on this year. Is like how important attribution is to begin with. It's like it's nice to have it as maybe a metric or some kind of bullet on a slide that like, yep, this was definitely APT 104, or this was a fuzzy bear, something like that. It's because as people, we want to put things in buckets and make it very easy to understand and easy to come to conclusions. But and pretty much every MDR, kind of customer service spot I've been in, attribution has been probably one of the last things. It's one of those nice to haves. I do think that if you have everybody using the same kind of malware, it does make things a little bit difficult because maybe you're chasing more unknowns at that point. Like if like take for example, Cure Ransomware. They use affiliates, and so when we see like the actual Akira stuff drop, that's one thing, but the tactics leading up to that drop are very widely, and so if I can understand the attacker's playbook a little bit, like understand maybe what their goals are, a Russian APT versus a commodity criminal may have different goals. So like for me as an analyst, if I have a better idea of that attribution, I can kind of understand maybe what the goals are, the crown jewels, maybe how they operated to get to that point. But if I don't have that sort of distinction with like, maybe the malware that's in use, at that point, I'm gonna be probably chasing more hypotheses, So it's like, if commodity malware A that's been built by AI is being used by 40 different actors, how they got to that point is there could be 40 different ways, and so potentially, the SOC maybe or your security team is getting more bogged down in just the investigation of how they got to that point. What did they exploit? Maybe like, was it they're looking for data? Were they trying to do a ransomware attack? Was it a, low and slow, trying to laterally move into another environment? Because that's where the crown jewels were. Like, that's the thing, is it just increases the amount of unknowns. But I think attribution is probably one of the least important things, but it's definitely a nice to have or a nice to know.
And Martin, I do have one opinion here myself. So earlier you said that there are some voices that says that attribution is going to die. Well, my opinion is that it's not going to die, but it will have to change. So the way we're doing attribution, the way we are, let's say, trying to understand who is behind things will still be required, at least for forensics investigations. So I do agree with Sean. Generically, if you just want to stop an attack that happens right now, this is not, in many scenarios, something that's going to be of interest. But assuming you're a large enterprise, assuming you have some, let's say, important documents, if somebody actually targets you, you would like to know who. So from this perspective, the way we're doing attribution, the things we're going to try to observe will have to change. With other, let's say, approaches will be required to avoid this type of attacks where pretty much everything will be LLM generated.
Well, attribution was always fun and easy in the whole industry. We all agreed how it should be done. So it's going to be interesting. Like, I agree with both perspectives, to be honest, because for APTs, you want to know who is behind. You don't necessarily need to put the label on the group, because even this year we had more and more challenges with like which group specifically it was. And in a lot of cases, these attributions are definitely not correct. So it will be interesting how this is going to change. So as it's always when I talk to you, we can have the whole webinar just discussing this. So let me move on to the next question. And we are moving from the AI-generated malware to something that was making a lot of waves in 2025, and that is the AI-orchestrated malware. This can be malware that is generated on the fly. This can be agentic frameworks that are just using something like Kali or some frameworks for the attacks. And in 2025, it was interesting because we have seen the first documented cases, even though I would argue in many cases it is not clear if it was attackers or just security researchers behind. We have seen a lot of very bold claims. We have seen some evidence, but also not. We have seen a kind of raising skepticism from some security leaders or like famous hackers talking about what actually we can expect from AI orchestrated malware, what is the reality in the field. And it's going to be really interesting what is going to happen in like 2026, because we see like a split of opinions happening at this moment. So question for Dragos. Now, so there is the predictions that we published, and we will share the link at the end, of course, and we will share it also in follow-up email. So there is a prediction that AI-driven attacks will show a technical regression. They are going to be actually less sophisticated than the attacks that we are seeing today. We look at the modern attackers, we mostly see like they are using living of the land attacks. A lot of these attacks are completely malware free, so they can blend with the traffic. Are AI orchestrated attacks fundamentally different from the perspective of the security control than human orchestrated attacks? So from detection perspective, and when you are looking at like what they are doing, is there any difference for you for detection of this, or is it the same thing, or is it fundamentally different type of attack, or is it just how it's being executed?
So it's not fundamentally different, but there are some differences, obviously, because of the AI backbone. Now, one of the things that I'm going to highlight that is, on my opinion, the most important one is that whenever we're talking about, a human that is orchestrating, an attack, the attack has some phases. So, for example, I have the initial access. I get a foothold on some organization and endpoint. Then what? Then me as a human, I'm going to do a little bit of research. Up to the point I have actually started the attack, I didn't have any idea on how the internal networks of that company looks like. Now that I have an access there, I need to understand where can I laterally go, what are my options, what kind of endpoints are there. I need to get some data, read them, maybe do a couple of iterations before I decide my next move. Now, usually from a detection perspective or from an EDR perspective, what you're going to see is you're going to see a period of activity where you detect some malicious activity, then some, let's say, time off, let's put it like this, where the data that was collected on the previous step is actually analyzed by the attacker to decide the next move, and then you see the next phase. Now, what we can expect is for those, let's say, time off to be smaller. Like I'm getting the data, the AI could actually analyze it faster and then move to the next step, do it like this, move to the next step, do it like this, and so on. What we can also expect is to have either some risks in in quality, or to have some over attacks. So overflow in terms of the attacks. Let me explain what I'm thinking here. So if you're a human, you may actually start thinking a couple of times. You may actually try to infer some data related to the company based on how you observe some things, what you know about the company. It is likely that at some point AI will be able to do some of the same assumption, but it's also possible that an AI, if the prompt, and right now I'm actually talking about the prompt that an attacker will actually use, is find, let's say, the fastest way to target this system. The AI may decide that the fastest way is to take different, let's say, smaller payloads and that can be easily built and test all of them, because it's easier to test all of them smaller rather than a more complicated one. Because fastest could actually have a completely different meaning for the AI rather than what the attacker expects. And it's all in the prompting here. At the same time, if I'm trying to say to an AI, hey, try to do this attack and stay as stealthier as you can within this network, then what we can expect is that the AI is going to try to search for some, let's say, CV that it knows that are rarely used, that based on the documentation that it had read, are not detected by a lot of tools and so on, so that it maintains the stealthiness. While you as an attacker don't necessarily mean that for the AI to actually use this, is just to be careful that it is not detected. So what I can say here is that an AI orchestrated malware is bounded to appear at some point, or if it's not already. But the prompting behind it, because AI orchestrated malware still implies that somebody has wrote a couple of prompts that explain how the attacker should go, like what are the phases. The prompts might not be what the attacker actually expects, might produce some unstable result, and this actually could work in our advantage. Let me give you another, let's say, maybe interesting prompt. Once you have access there, do whatever you can to make sure that you create a lateral movement. Now, do whatever you can could actually be translated by the AI like, okay, what is the list of all of the potential attacks that I have on Kali? Oh, is this 100 attacks? Let's try all of them. Now, obviously, if you try 100 attacks one after another, at some point the security solution will notice something is unusual there, and it will stop it. So the quality could be impaired if you don't know exactly how to properly write your prompt. One interesting advantage here is that I'm certainly sure that the attackers are going to test how the prompt works, but the reality is you need to test the prompts on real enterprises that you're targeting, that they don't necessarily have access to a large variety of them to test to see if everything is okay. So we can also expect some attacks that are going to be, let's say, a little bit sloppy, not because they cannot be AI orchestrated, but because the prompt behind the AI orchestrating attacks could have some limitation depending on how they were actually written.
There was an interesting, you remember when we were doing the reverse engineering on the prompt log? So for the context, prompt log was reported as the first AI enhanced ransomware in the world in 2025. The prompts actually looked like really interesting, like, hey, figure out what is the system. If it's normal PC, then exfiltrate data. If it is the industry controller, then destroy it. It looked like really sophisticated, and what you are just describing reminds me, I want to say like 1 or 2 weeks ago, I actually saw someone that has been trying to reproduce what is going to be the result of those prompts. So we looked at the text mostly, like what are they asking LLM to do? Someone was actually looking at the results, and what they came up with is that what was reported as a successful attack, like, hey, I exfiltrated the data, it put together the list of the documents, it analyzed those documents, describing like, here is the sensitive data, the PII, here is what we can find here. The only problem was that that was like completely fictional. The files didn't exist, like none of this. So they got the results saying, hey, attack was successful, here is everything I got, here are like the files. But it said, here you can find the files, there was nothing. The list of the files was completely fake. So again, in many cases, the only thing we do is that we are seeing the prompt, which looks scary because we assume AI is actually capable to follow these instructions. And then if we check like, hey, is it going to do what we are asking it to do? Yeah, that's another story. With this,
it's also a matter of, I'm sorry to jump in here. It's also a matter on what kind of models you're using. So the prompt log was actually using a llama model, which is a smaller model, at least the one that they were using, that can actually be, easily deployed somewhere where you can access it. The reality is that the larger the model, at least right now, the more quality you will get out of it. The main issue here is that for you to use a larger model, you actually need a larger infrastructure where you have to put it. So this actually comes with some issues that you have. So you either have some very powerful server somewhere that you can use, which, by the way, might also be identified by a network, traffic scanner that some prompts are being sent to that. or you're trying to use a public service somewhere, which will be identified by the one that actually uses the service. So it's not necessarily an easy problem. That's one thing. The second one is that, well, ideally, if you're trying to build something like prompt blocker, you need an interpreter. So what are the two things you can actually use? So obviously, an LLM is really good in writing code. You can actually use it, but you have to use something that can be easily executed locally. So you cannot say, hey, write me a piece of code in, let's say, C++, and then I will compile it locally. No, you kind of need the entire tool chain, depending on the operating system, you need to compile it there and so on. So you might get some errors. So ideally will be for, the language to create something in a language that you can actually interpret locally easily. So, and by the way, prompt blocker was based on Lua. So we can actually expect that this will work, but this will work with, let's say, scripting languages like Lua, Python, maybe Perl, Ruby, if they are already installed there, PowerShell, if we're talking about Microsoft system. You have to have some form of interpreter there. So this actually opens up some interesting options in terms of detection, because you can look more into these kind of scenarios. And
that is what you just pointed. So for everyone listening, that is something that was, by the way, not completely explained for the prompt lock. So you have something like an implant on your network that is executing all these commands. You do not have local autonomous LLM. So in the case for the prompt lock, they actually tested with two different models. One was 12 gig, the other one was 45 gig. And the implant is acting more like a proxy that still communicates with the backend somewhere behind, somewhere else running on your machine or whatever it is. They run into interesting challenge here. If you read the research paper, the smaller model was not performing well enough. And the bigger model that was more successful, they actually started running into guardrails. So it refused to do some of these operations. So just understanding like how the architecture of these attacks works, where is that logic being processed, where is it being executed? It is not as it's often described that you have like this super tiny, very smart agent that is traversing through your network and making decisions on the fly. Like that is not the reality.
And keep in mind that one mistake, one hallucination from the model that will translate in something that doesn't work properly locally could actually trigger an alert. That alert could actually reach the SOC at some point, and the SOC could actually easily create a firewall rule or something that's going to block access to the LLM, and the entire attack is doomed. So one of the things that every, let's say, malware writer, let's put it like this, actually struggles is reproducibility, right? So if I'm writing an attack, I need to be close to 100% certain that it's going to work the way I actually design it. Any kind of random factor there is going to be, let's say, a tough pill to swallow, because something goes wrong. From that point, you cannot be certain of anything that will happen there, and because of this, the time needed to prepare an attack, to test and retest and make sure that everything is okay, is going to be most likely quite large.
So yeah, I fully agree. And Sean, let's talk about this, because it's one thing, again, talking about capabilities. A lot of discussions that are, hey, this is not the prediction, this is reality today, are actually talking about kind of fictional scenarios that don't really exist. So Sean, question for you. For the context, I am specifically asking you, what are you seeing in the field, whether it's for Bitdefender MDR customers or it's about the documented cases by others? So the high value hacking, we are talking about ransomware affiliates. traditionally relies on staying under the radar. EDR is commodity today. SOC, MDR is providing you with the SecOps that you need. So most of the affiliates today are using malware-free attacks. We are seeing a lot of living of the land attack techniques. We are seeing a lot of, for example, click fix for initial access. So simple that it just works. Yeah. Why would a sophisticated actor trade this subtlety, staying under the radar, for excessive activity of an AI-orchestrated attack?
Yeah. So, Drankos brought up a lot of really good points. There's a whole ecosystem you have to develop for all of this to work, and a lot of testing. There's a lot of technical debt that'd be involved with all of that, and it's assuming that it's going to work perfectly. So to me, like, if we're already talking about things like, AI, like swarm attack or AI orchestrated, to me, it's going to be somebody that has the resources to do it. Whether it's the technical expertise, it's the actual capital. So in my mind, it's already going to be in the realm of like nation states or very well-financed criminal organizations that would even be able to pull this off. But in my mind, it's, I kind of see the potential for this in use as maybe kind of like a shock and awe attack. It's like, to overwhelm defenses by coming through a lot of different ways. That's kind of the way I could see this being used potentially. Like I remember, years ago when first coming into security, talking about how like DDoS attacks would be used as cover for another type of attack. And, I've never really seen that in the wild, at least in my experience. But to me, something like this could be that, because you're creating a lot of noise, you're coming from a lot of different angles, and, potentially, you're covering the true source or the true goal of the attack through all that. So I see it as, a potential thing, but I also see it as something that's, high amount of resources to even be able to kind of pull this off. And in my mind, also kind of like with DDoS, the noise of the attack is in itself a signature. So you're potentially able to mitigate things if you start to see like the hallmarks of an attack like this. Like if you get to understand, the things that they're using, I could probably maybe shut down or alert or detect faster based on all those other signatures. So I still think stealthy is going to be continue to be the approach, because if you're using shock and awe, it's more of a smash and grab, and to me it's not, you don't know if you're getting high value stuff. Whereas if you're low and slow, being stealthy, you're buying a lot of time, giving yourself a lot of time back as an attacker. That gives me more time to understand where I am in the environment, where the crown jewels are, where can I move, all the different things I can affect and touch. To me, stealth is still the way to go, but I could definitely see some use cases for some sort of like, AI orchestrated attack like this. I think eventually somebody's going to probably try it out, because there are groups out there that are somewhat innovative and they're willing to kind of like try a thing. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see at least, one group try it out, maybe some of the other guys kind of try to replicate the success. But, I think they're always trying new stuff just to see what works and what sticks. And so, yeah, there's probably going to be somebody that does it. I think it's going to be a nation state or very well-financed criminal group first, but eventually somebody's going to try to copy it also. But yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily like the 100% threat. I think it's still an outlier in my opinion, but that's it's an interesting thought process and exercise for sure.
Yeah, I think this topic requires.
Yeah, sorry, Martin. So I think it's more likely that initially, or maybe they already started to do this, that a form of hybrid AI orchestrated malware where a human still decides something is going to happen. So, for example, if you remember, you manage to find an entry point within an organization, you need to understand the network. You get some data. Now, usually, if it's just me that needs to understand that data, maybe I will try a couple of information that I can actually read. I have time to decide for the next step. One thing that I could actually change is gather more data. I still need the human need to be able to decide, but I can also use AI to analyze the entire data separately in the backend. Like say, hey, look at this, tell me what are the most probable entry points from this point, or what do you think are most relevant one, and so on. And this could actually be, let's say, a good exercise in going towards a more automated malware. But my guess is that right now it's more like a hybrid system that is being used.
I like to think about this all the time. Like, so the ransomware today is a gig economy model. Yeah, it's really close to like Uber, Airbnb, how they operate, operators versus affiliates. I like to think about AI orchestrated attacks, like similar to the autonomous self-driving cars. Everyone has been talking about it. It's absolutely logical thing that we keep hearing about for many, many years, and they are just very slowly becoming reality. And they started as a hybrid because it looks amazing on a paper, but the real life complications are much bigger. And what is going to be really interesting is the whole ransomware ecosystem is built around the trust between victims and attackers, that they will be able to decrypt the data, trust between affiliates and operators. This can bring a lot of chaos and uncertainty, because once you start seeing encrypted data, you pay for it and you are not able to get access to it because there was some hallucination on the way. Your business model suddenly will be a lot more shaky than it was. So anyway, we are actually planning to do a lot more deep dive into both AI generated and AI orchestrated attacks. It requires deeper attention. So let's move on to another kind of the threat that we can expect from AI in 2026, and that is the crisis of internal AI control. So we are seeing two different trends that are happening at the same time. We are seeing that we moved away from like early adopters of LLMs, technical people that are excited about it. Today, LLM is used by all the employees. It's like a lot of employees that fail like phishing tests suddenly decide to like dump data into public LLMs. That is one trend with the shadow AI. I know, Dragos, you did some research into this in 2025. And then there is the second trend at the same time, when there is like a rush to adopt agentic AI across like all the different industries and businesses. Dragos, you and me and the labs together wrote an article about the risks of MCP. And for me, the big shock was like MCP. The security in MCP is optional. It's left to developers. It is not like integral mandatory part of like the new core protocol that we are introducing. So question for you, Dragos. Your analysis that you shared this year shows that even when organizations have like official AI policy and provide licensed ChatGPT access, employees are still frequently using unsanctioned LLM services. How can you technically identify, how can you handle this like shadow AI connections that you see? How can you understand what is actually being used by your employees and which data are they sharing with LLMs? And it's a loaded question. I know it's not easy to answer.
Yeah, but before I actually explain some of these things, I think I need to first share some information that are going to clarify a little bit more how big this issue is. So I think everybody, when we're talking about LLMs, is maybe thinking about ChatGPT, or I don't know, maybe Gemini or Anthropic, which are the larger ones that everybody's using. What a lot of people don't know is that there are a lot of services out there that are actually using AI, and not every CISO knows about all of them. And by the way, right now we are tracking more than 200 such services. So it is very likely that regardless on the fact that somebody is going to use ChatGPT without a license and so on, it is also likely that a lot of people are going to use some services out there that are using LLMs, and they don't actually quite understand how they are using LLMs. They don't look at the EULA to understand how the data that they are going to provide there is going to be used. And this is very important. Now, to better explain how we can actually analyze some of this, I can let's say explain a couple of things from a technical perspective. So as I said, we are monitoring more than 200 services. For each services, we know how they are being used. Some of the services could actually be like you're using an API. And for them, we're actually at the network level monitor the API. Some of them could actually be you're using some web service and we're monitoring the web service. In some scenarios, you're actually using some extension on your editor of some sort that actually uses or a completely different tool that actually uses some form of AI in the backend. And we know about it, and what we are monitoring is that tool, that extension, and we're trying to understand how you're actually using, what is the kind of data that is being sent to that extension, and so on. So it's not a one technology that solves this, it's several technologies that allow us to identify what kind of AI service you're using and how you're actually using it. So that to answer the first question. To answer the second
I will
question,
ask you. I will ask you this: on a scale from 1 to 10, how serious do you think the shadow AI is a problem for like normal, typical Bitdefender customers? Let's say normal organizations.
So
compared to the other threats.
Right now, so I think right now it's not such a big a problem as as a direct attack, but it could become really relevant depending on what kind of AI service you're using. So again, and what kind of data you are using. That's why I'm saying it's a more generic problem. So let me give you a, let's say, maybe strange example, but let's put it like this. I work at the legal department. I have some documents that were being scanned. I have the pictures of them, and my task is I need to translate them all into a proper Word document. And my solution is, why don't I send all of them, which are internal private documents, to an AI and ask him to translate? Well, this is a problem, and this is a big problem because critical, important, relevant documents are being sent elsewhere. Now, depending where is that elsewhere, this could actually become a state problem, something even more complex. So, and by the way, the reason I'm saying this, it's fairly easy to say I'm just a small company. I'm sending some pictures of my invoices to an LLM. Yeah, most likely those invoices pose no such threat. But let's say I'm defense department within a country, and I work there, and I have some very internal documents related to the defense of that country, and I decide to send those documents to an LLM, maybe an LLM that is being operated by a different country. Well, this is really problematic.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and maybe it's not even
hard for me to put a pin saying it's more or less relevant, because it's all about the context here.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't even need to be like sending it to LLM. Maybe you are just using like a browser or Office extension that you've been using for 10 years, and you don't even think they change completely the way how they handle your data, and you just accept it years ago, like, yeah, you can access my browser, it's fine.
It's fine, and you don't know that that extension has changed, and now it's using some form of AI agent in the backend and so on.
Mm-hmm. And we are, as always, we are getting a little bit, again, like each of these questions, we could do dedicated webinar. So talking about like interesting internal AI related risks, let me put it in that bucket. Sean, question for you. I see a lot of conversations about like AI SOC being the future and saying like you can replace the human analyst with AI easily. We are seeing this like all over the place. So give me your, and again, this is your personal opinion. Does AI offer a genuine path to replacing human SOC analysts? Or are the companies that are now firing all these people that know the environment, have the skills, with AI products, are they making mistakes and maybe they should be a little bit skeptical? What is your take on this?
I will say I will start off with a hot take that you guys were talking about just a couple minutes earlier, is the talking about like sort of the attack surface and the introduction of sort of like shadow AI. One of the things that I keep thinking about is how many different things are pushing AI to just normal users, you know? So it's like Microsoft is going to Copilot, Google, every chance it gets, is throwing Gemini in your face. And, you know, I'm no Apple's, no, you know, also been doing a lot of that same stuff. So thinking down to like your normal users, your consumers, things like that, you know, I've heard of people that had no idea that they were using Gemini as a Google search, you know, like they just defaulted to that. So if you kind of like multiply that, you know, across the many users that are maybe not quite up to speed on like what AI is doing, you know, there's a really interesting attack surface problem, I think, that's going to be there, just because there's so many products that are shoving it in our faces that we're good with it because we understand the risk and we read about it every day. But you know, normal consumers out there, normal users, probably aren't considering a lot of the stuff out there. And so, like to Dragos's point, it's like, I have a problem with this document, I need to plug it in to translate it, and oops, you got your whole, you know, whatever, you know, important document out there, you know, is now in an LLM somewhere and discoverable. So I think the implications of just how much is getting shoved down our throats is like something to consider too, is that you're going to have inadvertent disclosures, and how do you deal with that, you know, with shadow AI? I know there's a lot of tech out there. There's a few startups that are getting into the space of protecting, you know, LLMs. Yeah, I'm really curious to see how this continues to develop. I do think, kind of back to the original question, is, you know, there's always been kind of this threat of the danger of, you know, human analysts being replaced, and it's something that I see in CTI as kind of a big question. I see that a lot with the SOC, and I know that there are definitely, you know, companies out there that have started to kind of figure out ways to sort of implement, you know, AI into different areas of operations. And I think, you know, for the near term, you know, over the next year, couple of years, probably there's going to be probably a hybrid approach as we sort of like adopt different things with AI and understand how we can work to do a process. You know, there's a lot of processes within my own team that we've, you know, started to implement certain things to sort of maybe speed up different processes as far as for like maybe research, you know, kind of understanding sort of like a big picture of things to synthesize a lot of big data. So I think we're all kind of trying to figure out how to do it. And I think that for us, it's important to still kind of have that person in the loop, you know, and what that looks like a few years down the road, I'm not sure, but I think at this point it's going to be adopting sort of like those micro, yeah, 12 months.
Only 12 months. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's going to be adopting a lot of different microservices that involve AI to sort of improve process, to get better at security, you know, and having a higher prediction model. I know Dragos has talked about before, like some just the operational data that we have. It's like, you know, the percentages of accuracy are getting better over time as, you know, more data gets looked at, you know. So I think that we're getting to a point where we can trust it a lot more. You know, definitely shows its work a lot more, which is nice. I definitely don't run into as many hallucinations as I did way back when, but I think it's still going to be a very like trusted but verify, you know, kind of hybrid approach as we kind of like start leaning into this. You know, there'll probably be organizations that'll look at ways to replace people with AI, and I don't even want to get into the ethics of all that. But you know, I think it's going to be one of those things that, you know, for us, you know, security practitioners, I think it's going to be just little bits and pieces. How can we implement? How can we improve? How do we get better at doing stuff with AI as a complementary kind of microservice? So I think that's where we're going.
Okay, let's move on. We have two more things to discuss. So the next one is more, we are moving from like hypothetical conversations more to something that we actually already started seeing and discussing as a trend in 2025. Attacks on hypervisor, attacks on infrastructure. We are seeing combination of a few interesting trends happening at the same time. So the number of attacks is higher than before. We are seeing a lot of attacks on infrastructure. So not like carpet bombing when you encrypt like all the endpoints, specifically going only after IT infrastructure, going after virtual machines. So focusing the attack not on all employees, but only on IT department. In our annual survey, we found out like, what was it, 58% of managers confirmed that they did not report security breach, even when they knew it should be reported. So we are seeing these more sophisticated ransomware groups that are moving more to precision strikes instead of carpet bombing. So very often, I would argue, you can say, a lot of senior IT engineers and architects from countries where they cannot find a job will suddenly realize, yeah, being an affiliate is actually a really lucrative job. So question for Dragos, as I was mentioning, like senior IT engineers are increasingly joining these ransomware groups as affiliates. They bring deep familiarity with the enterprise management tools they have been using for tools, whether it's Active Directory, group policy, whatever it is. Again, the tools that you use for attacks are pretty much the same as used for management. From a detection engineering standpoint, how do you build controls that can distinguish between legitimate administrator performing routine maintenance and malicious expert that is using exactly the same tools? And we launched the tool Phaser that is specifically designed to do this. But again, from detection engineering, like, what are the challenges? How would you approach this problem? Like, what does it mean for you as a challenge?
Okay, so actually, we need a little bit of context here. And that context is actually going to help us understand how we should approach this kind of problems. Okay, one of the, let's say, major problem in terms of how the detection ecosystem works is that every security product ultimately tries to build a security solution that will be good for every one of its users. Not the best, but good enough. Meaning that if I try to build a security solution and it's designed for both Martin and Sean, it's going to be good for both Martin and Sean. It's not going to be the best possible security solution for Martin or the best possible security solution for Sean. Because being the best possible security solution means that I need to tailor it so that it is, designed to work perfectly for Martin. But to work perfectly for Martin, this actually means that some things that that security solution might decide to block might not be something that Sean will agree. So just to give a very maybe stupid example, but something we can actually think of. Let's say that Martin truly hates a specific browser. I'm not going to name it, but let's say that truly hates, he never use it. Now, the security solution, knowing this, will actually decide, I'm not going to allow that browser to work. But that is the browser that, let's say, Sean actually loves. So if we decided to block that browser completely in case of Martin, and an attacker enters somehow there and tries to open that browser, then the security solution will be immediately triggered. Now, the attacker cannot actually know that that specific browser is actually blocked only in case of Martin, because it's something very specific to it. And the way I actually rephrase it, pretty much I moved from a traditional way of thinking about cybersecurity into a more custom approach, something designed for each user. And this is actually what Phaser is. Instead of trying to build one security solution that will actually work good for everybody, let's try to build a security solution designed for each one of our users, designed to complement the baseline cybersecurity that we provide with something else that will protect that user and that user alone, based on what the security solution can learn about that user. Now, how this actually fits into the question that Martin says? Well, it fits because it learns behavior. So you're asking, Martin, how can we differentiate, a regular, let's say, tool call from a malicious call that is being done in the same way? And I can actually, let's take a very, let's say, simple example. Let's say a shutdown command. which me as an administrator can run just to, restart the server. But at the same time, a ransomware can actually run to make sure that it, restart in, a safe mode to run the ransomware payload. Maybe it's the same exact payload. Okay, how we can differentiate it? Well, if we're just looking at the command, we cannot, because in both cases it's going to be the same thing. If we're thinking on the context, like, do I as an administrator have ever used that command? If I never use that command and I suddenly see somebody from my account is trying to use it, then that's the actual trigger that says, yeah, you need to be looking here more carefully because there is something strange there. And this is what actually phaser is. Obviously, it's a more complex than what I have tried to describe here, but the concept is the same.
We can send, like in the follow-up email, we can send more information, but the whole customized security is, yeah, that is probably like the shift to prevention is something that has to happen at this stage, when what we are seeing is like the EDR is becoming commodity, and at the same time, EDR bypasses are becoming commoditized knowledge by the threat actors. So, Sean, follow-up question for you is, again, we are seeing like senior IT engineers becoming ransomware affiliates. They know enterprise infrastructure so well, maybe they struggle to find normal job and suddenly realize there is career path for them that they didn't even know exists. Does this shift suggest that the sophistication in 2026 is not going to be in the code, but it's going to be more in the knowledge of the attackers, like understanding how the IT infrastructure works and where they can hit it?
Yeah, so it's kind of, I kind of look at it almost like a bank heist, or like, the Italian job. It's like, you're getting into a high value area, and so instead of like, tripping all over the place, you're being noisy, you're shining a flashlight all around the room, that triggers a security guard response, or it gets picked up on camera. If I'm an admin and I'm crawling around in a new area, I'm pretty familiar with enterprise systems, so that means I'm in there in the dark. I got night vision goggles on. I'm sliding under the laser beams, so I think having that expertise is going to be pretty interesting, especially if you have people that are getting laid off, as we've seen in the IT and tech sectors. Maybe you feel unappreciated or underappreciated. Maybe it becomes like a career move for you. And so I think it's definitely an interesting threat if we have very experienced people, going through there, going into, basically the criminal ecosystem. Like it's there's always this thing that comes up in like special operations, like special forces movies, where they say like slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And so if I'm an admin that's had a lot of experience, I know what I'm doing in there. I know it looks normal because I've done it hundreds of times, and so I know which tools are gonna, how they're gonna work. And so if I'm in there, doing my lateral movement, doing my reconnaissance, I know it looks normal because I've done it myself, and so, I start to like maybe move out of, special malware and pen testing tools, because I know those will light up a SOC, but I know that if I install TeamViewer, that's not going to be a big deal. I know that if I use PowerShell, may not get caught right away. So I think that's going to be an interesting danger, kind of as we see how economics turn out within the industry, and then just as if crime continues to pay, it's going to be an interesting move to see more experience out there in the world, for sure.
Talking about economics, and let's move on to the last question today. That's about the ransomware as a service evolution. So part of the things where we are seeing a lot of myths on, again, like professional social networks and such, is that ransomware is essentially a rational business ecosystem that is driven by return on investment. So in many cases, the question is like, hey, can you do this? Yeah, we can, but like there is no motivation why we should change anything. Again, like very simple method works. If you are using tools that are already available on the victim systems, why should you develop anything new? Similar reason why we see the spike in like the click fix. Super simple, it just works. So let's start with question for Dragos. We in the report we also include some conclusions and recommendations how to stay safe in 2026, and we are recommending to pretty much start forcing attackers to take riskier actions by proactively disabling tools like PowerShell. And again, don't do it for the whole company, that's never going to work, but do it by analyzing user behavior. Sean, I don't know about you, like I am using PowerShell at least once a week. If it's slow week, probably daily. Please don't disable it for everyone, but if there are some unsecured parts or commandlets, for example, in the PowerShell, you can disable those for me. So question for you, Dragos. If we implement this hostile environment strategy, where we will try to build our organization, our network to be hostile to the attackers, how does this change the actionability of alerts for the SOC teams? If you implement, for example, Phaser, what does it mean for your SOC team?
Okay, I would like first to tackle a little bit the word hostile. Because while it is correct, hostile for the attacker, it doesn't necessarily has to be hostile for the employee. And one of the things that Phaser is designed to is to make sure that it doesn't affect the way you're actually doing your work. So it works, around you, not bothering you, while at the same time it can create a hostile environment.
So Dragos, I have a big challenge for you. Explain Phaser, what it does in 20 seconds or less.
In 20 seconds or less. So the simplest way is, customize tailor security, where I'm trying to learn what kind of tools you're using, how you are using them, and only allow you to use those tools and in the way you're actually using those tools, and not other variations that are not according to your behavior, and block everything else. That being said, yeah, thank you, Martin. It was in less than 20 seconds. But that being said, well, in terms of the SOC, we shouldn't expect more, let's say, alerts. The contrary, we should expect maybe less, because we're going to actually disable some of the controls that will normally trigger some things that are going to be sent to the SOC. So in reality, we will get maybe fewer alerts. That's one thing. We will, however, see some alerts that are going to be generated by, a security component like Phaser, which, the SOC team will have to analyze and decide whether if it's something normal for, that person or not. Now, one, let's say, smaller observation that I have with this technology is that in some scenarios, the SOC team might get some alerts that are not false positive, but are more related to a shadow activity of that person, like either a shadow eye, either some form of shadow IT activity that person is being performing, or something similar, which will have to be treated as well. But I would expect to have the same or less amounts of alerts that are normally being sent, at least from a SOC perspective. From an attacker perspective, yeah, so the situation is going to be harder. The attack surface is going to be reduced. Trying to use some of the tools that you're accustomed to might be blocked. The moment you're trying to use one of those tools, the SOC team will be alerted and they could actually immediately take action, and so on.
Sounds good. Sean, final question of the day for you. So ransomware as a service remains a rational business that is focused on ROI. That's going to stay the same. Why do simple attacks like click fix or voice cloning continue outperforming the high-tech threats that the media and, again, like professional social networks are so obsessed with?
Yeah, well, it's kind of just like phishing. It's because they just work. It's interesting just because the way these attacks are designed, especially click fix, you're cloning things like that. All those basically are designed to function outside of the security ecosystem. So it's, you know, you can, if you can bypass all the controls and countermeasures that I have in place in my secure building, and I can attack you in the parking lot instead, then I'm going to do that because it's easier. I don't have visibility. You know, people won't know what's happening. So I think they're continuing to use that stuff because it works. And I think there's going to be continued evolution of different types of social engineering that, you know, once we're over click fix, there's going to be another thing. You know, there's going to be fixed prompt or, you know, something. I don't know what, but you know, this next 12 months, I think we're going to see an evolution and, you know, kind of a growth into something else. And so it's that cat and mouse game, man, that, you know, blue team and red teams can always play. And so, you know, once we adapt, they adapt, and it just continues in a vicious cycle. And that's just how it's going to be. And that's why we're going to keep jobs. So.
Yeah. It's interesting because I found like one of the big mistakes is we keep talking about like how this is all becoming more sophisticated, and in reality it is not about like the tools becoming more complex. It's the opposite way. Like, hey, let's find something that is so simple that so yeah. The click fix, I will include it in the following follow-up email description of what it is, how it works. It's like probably the most simple attack, and I know I've seen reports that there was like increase of 400% in the number of attacks, and it doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, I mean, you said it right there. It's simple. I mean, it's so simple as scalable, simple as transferable, and it can be used across a lot of different technical abilities, you know, so doesn't require a ton of skills and knowledge to implement, but if you have all the means, you know, why not try it out? So yeah.
It also has a very interesting, let's say, nuance here. It doesn't require any connection that you as an attacker have to have towards the attacker. Any RDP connection, any reverse TCP connection, nothing. Just somebody foolish enough to believe what you're writing on a page and running some of the commands that you're writing there.
100%.
You know, just somebody that believes you. Which is actually a very interesting mix into social engineering, a little bit of phishing, and you know, malicious attack.
Yeah, I don't need 100% success. I just need some success to work, you know. So that's it's in their favor.
So, gentlemen, absolutely zero surprises here that we are over time again. And I think we could go like way deeper if we would have unlimited amount of time and attention. But I would like to thank you very much for this conversation. It was really, as always, it was really interesting. I would like to thank all attendees for staying with us all the time. We do not have time to take questions because this could go over like for a few more hours, but what I can promise you, any questions that you asked or you are going to ask right now, we will definitely follow up and get to you. And one final resource that I would like to share here is the full article with our cybersecurity predictions for 2026, where we are trying to differentiate between the hype versus reality. And as I mentioned again, there will be follow-up email, and in that follow-up email, we are going to include all the different links of what we discussed today. So not just predictions themselves, but different cases. We can share with you the Shrink Locker as an example of completely malware-free ransomware attack. We can include the click fix that was mentioned a couple of times. We can include links to Phaser that can help with a lot of these emerging threats that we are seeing today. So again, I would like to thank everyone and stay safe in 2026. And again, thanks for your attention. Have a good day.
Thank you.